Let's start by clearing up one of the biggest myths people carry into relationships with narcissistic personalities. They assume narcissists fear being exposed, being yelled at, being abandoned, or being publicly embarrassed. And I understand why that belief exists. Because when you're on the receiving end of manipulation, gaslighting, and emotional chaos, it feels logical to think that confrontation or calling them out would scare them. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Narcissists are not afraid of conflict. They are not afraid of anger. They are not even afraid of being seen as the bad guy. In fact, many of them thrive in that space. What they fear, what genuinely unsettles them at a core psychological level, is the loss of control. Everything a narcissist does revolves around control. Control of the narrative, control of how they're perceived, control of your emotions, your reactions, your availability, your self-doubt. They are not building relationships in the way most people understand them. They are building systems of influence. And within that system, your emotional reactions are currency. Your explanations, your tears, your attempts to be understood, your hope that this time it'll be different. All of that feeds the system. As long as they can pull a reaction from you, they feel powerful. As long as they can destabilize you, confuse you, or keep you engaged, they feel safe. This is why arguments with narcissists feel endless. You're trying to resolve something. They're trying to win something. You're trying to be heard. They're trying to stay in control. And when you don't understand this difference, you end up exhausting yourself trying to communicate with someone who is not listening in good faith. You think the problem is wording, tone, or timing. It's not. The problem is that the narcissist's fear is not being disliked. It's being irrelevant. Loss of control terrifies a narcissist because it exposes the fragility underneath the grandiosity. Control is how they regulate their self-worth. When they can't influence your emotional state, they feel unanchored. When they can't provoke you, charm you, intimidate you, or guilt you into engagement, they start to feel something they spend their lives avoiding: powerlessness. And that feeling is intolerable for them. This is also why going no contact or emotionally disengaging often leads to escalation. People are surprised by this. They say, "I thought if I stopped reacting, things would calm down." But from the narcissist perspective, your calm is not peace, it's a threat. Your silence is not maturity, it's defiance, because silence communicates something they cannot stand. You no longer control me. Here's the part that's crucial to understand as we move toward the idea of a single sentence that can permanently shift the dynamic. That sentence doesn't work because it's clever. It doesn't work because it's cutting or dramatic. It works because it reflects a deeper internal shift that has already happened inside you. A narcissist doesn't respond to words alone. They respond to the loss of access. They respond to the moment they realize they can no longer get inside your head. Think about how often narcissistic relationships revolve around emotional volatility, highs and lows, intensity, urgency, crisis. When you step out of that emotional roller coaster, you are no longer predictable. And unpredictability, when it's rooted in emotional stability rather than chaos, is deeply unsettling to someone who relies on controlling outcomes. They don't know which lever to pull anymore. The old tricks don't land. The familiar buttons don't work. And that's when fear shows up. Not the kind of fear that looks like panic or remorse, but the kind that looks like rage, dismissal, sudden indifference, or frantic attempts to pull you back in, because control slipping away feels like survival slipping away to them. This is why you'll often see sudden love bombing, threats, or dramatic exits right after you set a boundary. It's not coincidence. It's fear. And here's where people often get stuck. They want the narcissist to admit wrongdoing. They want acknowledgement. They want closure. But seeking those things keeps you tied to the very control dynamic that's hurting you. Closure does not come from their insight. It comes from your detachment. The most powerful shift you can make is realizing that the narcissist does not need to understand you for you to move on. They only need to lose access to you. When a narcissist senses that you are no longer trying to convince them, fix them, or win them over, something fundamental changes. The game ends, and they know it. That's the moment when a simple, calm sentence, delivered without anger, without explanation, without a need to be believed, lands with more force than any argument ever could. Because it confirms their worst fear. The control is gone, and it's not coming back. You don't scare a narcissist by fighting harder. You scare them by stepping out of the fight entirely. Once you understand that control, not conflict, is what truly fuels a narcissist, the next realization can feel almost counterintuitive. Most people believe that standing up for themselves means speaking louder, explaining more clearly, defending their truth more passionately. That makes sense in healthy relationships. But in a narcissistic dynamic, emotional confrontation does not weaken their power. It reinforces it. Every emotional reaction you give becomes proof that they still matter, that they can still reach you, that they can still move you. This is why so many people walk away from conversations with narcissists feeling drained, confused, and somehow smaller than when they went in. You thought you were asserting yourself. You thought you were finally saying the things you'd held in for years. But what actually happened was that the narcissist gained more data. They learned what hurts you, what triggers you, what keeps you talking, and the more emotional energy you pour into confrontation, the more control they quietly regain. Emotional detachment, on the other hand, is deeply misunderstood. People think it means being cold, cruel, or uncaring. They worry it means suppressing feelings or pretending nothing hurts. That's not what this is. Emotional detachment is not the absence of feeling. It's the absence of entanglement. It's the moment you stop handing your emotional state over to someone who has proven they will misuse it. A narcissist expects emotion. They expect anger, tears, explanations, defensiveness. They are prepared for that. In fact, they rely on it. Emotion keeps the connection alive. It keeps the drama circulating. Detachment disrupts that entire system. When you respond calmly, briefly, or not at all, you're not being passive, you're being unpredictable. And unpredictability, when rooted in self-regulation, is profoundly unsettling to someone who depends on controlling outcomes. Think about how often narcissistic conversations escalate. A small comment turns into a big fight. A boundary turns into an attack. A request turns into a character assassination. That escalation is not accidental. It's designed to pull you into an emotional state where you lose clarity. Because when you lose clarity, they gain leverage. Detachment blocks that pathway. It keeps you grounded while they spiral. And here's the key part. Emotional detachment is not silence for the sake of punishment. It's silence that comes from knowing you've already said everything that needed to be said. It's the calm that comes when you stop trying to be understood by someone who is committed to misunderstanding you. That shift alone changes the power balance more than any argument ever could. Narcissists are deeply uncomfortable with neutrality. Neutrality doesn't feed them. It doesn't confirm their importance. It doesn't give them a role to play. When you stop reacting, they don't experience that as peace. They experience it as abandonment of the game. And for someone whose identity is built around winning, that's destabilizing. This is why people are often shocked by how narcissists respond to emotional detachment. Instead of calming down, they may escalate. Instead of respecting boundaries, they may push harder. Instead of letting go, they may suddenly become affectionate or apologetic. None of this is about love or insight. It's about regaining emotional access. Detachment threatens their sense of control, and the threat feels existential. But here's the part that matters most for you. Emotional detachment doesn't start with them. It starts with you deciding that your peace matters more than proving a point. It starts when you realize that explaining yourself to someone who benefits from misunderstanding you is a losing strategy. It starts when you stop outsourcing your sense of reality to someone who keeps rewriting it. This is not easy work. Detachment often feels wrong at first, especially if you're empathetic, conscientious, or deeply invested in harmony. You may feel guilty, you may feel cold, you may worry you're giving up. But what you're actually doing is reclaiming your emotional autonomy. You're choosing not to participate in a dynamic that requires your dysregulation to survive. And this is where detachment becomes far more powerful than confrontation. Confrontation keeps you engaged in the narcissist's arena. Detachment removes you from it entirely. You're no longer trying to win their approval or expose their behavior. You're simply stepping out. And when you step out, the narcissist loses the audience they need to perform. This is also why emotional detachment often precedes that one sentence that changes everything, because the sentence itself is not a weapon, it's a confirmation. It confirms that you are no longer emotionally invested in the outcome. It confirms that you are no longer available for manipulation, debate, or emotional extraction. And when that realization lands, it lands hard. You don't need to convince a narcissist that you're done. They feel it when your emotions are no longer up for negotiation. And that feeling, that sudden absence of emotional access, is what they fear far more than your anger ever could. Detachment isn't weakness. It's the moment you stop giving your power away. Once you reach emotional detachment, something very important shifts inside you. You stop looking for the perfect argument. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop wondering which combination of words will finally make them understand, apologize, or change. And that's when people often ask the question that brings us here: what is the sentence? What is the one thing I can say that will finally make a narcissist back off? Here's where I need to slow this down, because this is where most people get it wrong. They assume the sentence must be sharp, intimidating, or devastating. They imagine something clever, something exposing, something that lands like a verbal mic drop. But that assumption comes from the same emotional place the narcissist has been exploiting all along. It's rooted in the idea that power comes from dominance. In reality, the sentence that creates fear isn't aggressive at all. It's final. Narcissists are very comfortable with aggression. They live in it. They know how to escalate, deflect, counterattack, and twist words. If you come at them with anger or threats, you're stepping onto familiar ground. They may not like it, but they know how to play there. Finality, on the other hand, is unfamiliar territory. It leaves no room for argument, no opening for negotiation, no emotional hook to grab onto. This is why long explanations never work. The moment you start explaining, you're signaling that the conversation is still open, that there's still a chance, that there's still something to discuss. Narcissists don't hear explanations as clarity, they hear them as access. Every extra word is an invitation. Finality removes the invitation altogether. The sentence that truly lands is usually short, calm, almost disappointingly simple. And that's exactly why it works. It doesn't try to convince. It doesn't seek validation. It doesn't ask to be understood. It states a reality and stops. For someone who relies on emotional engagement to maintain control, that abrupt emotional closure is deeply unsettling. Think about how narcissists typically respond to boundaries. If the boundary is emotional, they argue. If it's dramatic, they mock it. If it's angry, they escalate. But when a boundary is delivered with quiet certainty and no follow-up, they don't know where to go next. There's nothing to push against, nothing to dismantle, nothing to spin. The conversation doesn't continue, and that's the point. What makes this sentence powerful is not the words themselves, it's the energy behind them. Narcissists are remarkably sensitive to shifts in emotional availability. They can tell when someone is bluffing. They can tell when someone is still hoping for a reaction. But they can also tell when someone is genuinely done. And when that realization hits, it creates a kind of psychological freefall, because finality communicates several things at once without spelling any of them out. It says, "I'm not waiting for you." It says, "I'm not invested in the outcome." It says, "You don't get a vote in my next chapter." And perhaps most unsettling of all, it says, "This no longer revolves around you." For someone whose entire relational world revolves around being central, being needed, being reacted to, that message is terrifying. Not because it's cruel, but because it's indifferent. Indifference is the one thing they cannot reframe, attack, or seduce their way out of. People often worry that being final is too harsh, that it's unkind, that it will provoke retaliation. And it's true, finality can provoke a response. But that response is not because the sentence was aggressive. It's because it removed hope. Hope of control, hope of re-engagement, hope of pulling you back into the cycle. And here's an important distinction. Finality does not mean closure for them. It means closure for you. Narcissists rarely experience closure the way other people do. They don't sit with insight and acceptance. They move on to the next source of supply. The fear comes not from losing you as a person, but from losing the role you played in regulating their emotional world. That's why this sentence often lands hardest when it's delivered without drama. No shaking voice, no long pauses, no follow-up messages. You say it once and then your behavior aligns with it. That alignment is what seals it. Because narcissists are watching patterns, not promises. They're looking for cracks. When there are none, the reality sets in. And this is where people sometimes underestimate themselves. They think the power is in finding the perfect words. It's not. The power is in meaning them. The sentence works because it's the outward expression of an internal decision that's already been made. You're not trying to scare the M. You're not trying to win. You're simply done participating. Finality doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't explain. It closes the door and walks away. And that quiet certainty is what they never see coming. When that calm, final sentence is spoken, something important happens beneath the surface, something most people don't see. But the narcissist feels immediately, because the real impact of that sentence isn't in its vocabulary, it's in what it silently communicates. Narcissists are extraordinarily attuned to subtext. They listen less to content and more to tone, energy, and implication. They are constantly scanning for emotional availability, for openings, for signs that they still matter. And when those signals disappear, the message is unmistakable. Without saying much at all, that sentence tells them, I see you clearly now. Not in an angry, accusatory way, but in a settled, resolved way. It says you're no longer confused by the gaslighting, no longer pulled off balance by the contradictions, no longer hoping that insight or empathy will suddenly appear. For a narcissist, being seen clearly is deeply uncomfortable. Their power depends on ambiguity, on keeping you unsure of what's real and what's not. Clarity removes that advantage. At the same time, the sentence communicates something even more destabilizing. I'm no longer trying to change you. This is huge. Narcissists are used to people trying to reason, trying to explain, trying to save the relationship. All of that effort reinforces their central role. When you stop trying, it signals that you've accepted who they are, and that acceptance doesn't come with tolerance or hope. It comes with disengagement, and disengagement tells them the relationship has lost its usefulness. There's also a third message embedded in that moment, and it may be the most threatening of all. You no longer have access to my emotional world. No more reactions on demand. No more spirals after a conversation. No more late-night ruminations fueled by something they said. Narcissists measure relevance by emotional impact. When that impact drops to zero, they feel erased. Not forgotten, erased. And that's a level of loss they are not equipped to process. What's striking is how little needs to be said for all of this to land. Because narcissists don't need you to explain these messages. They infer them. They sense the shift in posture, the lack of urgency, the absence of emotional charge. The same sentence spoken earlier in the relationship wouldn't have had this effect. It works now because your energy has changed. The words simply confirm what they already feel slipping away. This is why people are often surprised by the narcissist's reaction. Sometimes there's sudden rage, sometimes there's mocking dismissal, sometimes there's a chilling indifference that appears overnight, and sometimes there's a last-ditch attempt to pull you back in with charm, vulnerability, or promises. All of the reactions come from the same place, the realization that the dynamic has fundamentally changed and that they are no longer steering it. It's also why this sentence can feel anticlimactic to the person saying it. You may expect fireworks, you may expect a dramatic acknowledgement. But the real shift doesn't happen outwardly, it happens internally. The power of that sentence is that it closes multiple doors at once. It ends the argument you've been having for years. It ends the fantasy that clarity will fix things. It ends the hope that if you just say it the right way, they'll finally show up differently. And that ending can feel strangely quiet. There's grief in it, there's relief in it, there's a moment where you realize that the energy you've been pouring into managing someone else's emotions is now available to you. The narcissist feels that loss of energy immediately, even if they can't name it. They feel the vacuum where your attention used to be. Another layer of what that sentence communicates is this: I trust my own perception now. Narcissistic relationships often erode self-trust. You question your memory, your reactions, your standards. When you speak from a place of calm certainty, you're signaling that the internal debate is over. You're no longer asking them to validate your reality. You've already done that for yourself. And when someone who once doubted themselves stops doubting, the entire power structure collapses. This is also why the sentence doesn't invite discussion. It doesn't need to. Discussion implies negotiation. Negotiation implies leverage. But this moment isn't about leverage. It's about boundaries that don't require enforcement because you're no longer standing in the line of fire. You're stepping away. People sometimes worry that this makes them seem cold or unkind. But what it actually reflects is emotional maturity. You're no longer asking someone to give you something they've shown they can't give. You're no longer punishing yourself by staying in a dynamic that requires you to abandon yourself. The sentence is not a verdict on them, it's a declaration about you. And here's the quiet truth underneath all of it. Narcissists don't fear words. They fear irrelevance. They fear the moment they realize they are no longer the emotional center of your world. When that sentence lands, it tells them exactly that, without saying it outright. You don't need to explain your freedom for it to be real. There's a part of this conversation that's uncomfortable, but it's essential if this is actually going to help you rather than just sound empowering. That one sentence, the calm final sentence, only works when you mean it. And I don't mean when you want to mean it or when you're hoping it will scare them into changing. I mean when something inside you has already let go. Because narcissists are exceptionally good at detecting emotional attachment even when you think you're hiding it well. If that sentence is as a test, they will feel it. If it's delivered as a threat, they will challenge it. If it's delivered as a plea disguised as strength, they will exploit it. The reason people sometimes say, "I tried that and it didn't work," is because the sentence itself wasn't the problem. The emotional tether was still intact. Narcissists don't listen the way other people do. They're not weighing the logic of your words. They're scanning for hesitation, longing, fear, and hope. They're asking one question beneath everything you say: do I still matter enough to affect you? If the answer is yes, even a little, they know the door isn't really closed. This is why bluffing backfires. Saying "I'm done" while still checking your phone, still replaying conversations, still hoping they'll realize what they've lost sends mixed signals. And mixed signals are an invitation. To a narcissist, uncertainty is opportunity. They don't need certainty from you, they need cracks. And emotional attachment creates plenty of them. Meaning the sentence requires that you've already grieved. Grieved the relationship you hoped for. Grieved the version of them you believed in. Grieved the idea that if you were just clearer, kinder, or more patient, something would finally shift. That grief is not weakness, it's the work. Without it, the sentence is just noise. This is also why narcissists often react most intensely when they sense the shift before the sentence is ever spoken. They feel you pulling away emotion. Ally, you're less reactive, less available, less eager to explain. And that's when they escalate. They provoke. They accuse. They suddenly become emotional or nostalgic. All of that is designed to pull you back into attachment, because attachment is where their power lives. If you haven't done the internal work, those moments will hook you. You'll feel compelled to clarify, reassure, or defend yourself. And the sentence, if it comes at all, will come from frustration rather than resolve. Frustration invites argument. Resolve ends it. There's a quiet confidence that comes with meaning what you say. It's not loud. It's not performative. It doesn't rush. When you mean the sentence, you're not watching their face to see how it lands. You're not waiting for a reaction. You're already oriented forward. And that orientation is what they feel. This is why the sentence doesn't need repetition. Repetition suggests doubt. When you mean it once is enough. Your behavior does the rest. You stop engaging in circular conversations. You stop responding to bait. You stop explaining yourself to people who have proven they will misuse your vulnerability. And consistency does what words never could. It's also important to say this, meaning the sentence doesn't make you cruel. It doesn't make you heartless. It means you've stopped confusing compassion with self-abandonment. Many people stay emotionally attached because they don't want to hurt the narcissist. even though the narcissist has repeatedly hurt them. But emotional detachment is not punishment, it's protection. And protection feels threatening to someone who relies on access. When you mean the sentence, you are no longer available for emotional extraction. You are no longer the person they can offload onto, provoke, or regulate themselves through. That loss is immediate and unmistakable. People often ask, how do I know when I'm ready? You'll know because the sentence won't feel dramatic. It will feel almost boring. There won't be adrenaline. There won't be a rush. There will be a steady sense of clarity. And that steadiness is what makes the sentence land so hard. Because narcissists thrive on intensity. Calm certainty is alien to them. Another sign you mean it is that you're no longer invested in being believed. If they twist your words, you don't rush to correct them. If they accuse you of being cold or cruel, you don't scramble to defend your character. That urge to prove yourself has faded, and without that urge, the dynamic collapses. This is also where people reclaim their power without trying to dominate. You're not trying to scare them. You're not trying to teach them a lesson. You're simply opting out. And opting out is devastating to a system that only works when both people keep playing. The sentence becomes effective not because it wounds them, but because it confirms what they've been trying to deny, that they no longer have influence, that they can't pull you back with confusion or intensity, that the role you played in their emotional economy is no longer available. So if you're not there yet, that's okay. This isn't about rushing to say the right thing. It's about getting to a place where saying it is inevitable, where it's not a performance but a reflection. Because when you mean it, you don't need the sentence to scare them. Your absence already has. By the time you reach this point, something important has already happened. The focus has shifted. At the beginning of this journey, the question often sounds like this: how do I make them stop? How do I protect myself? How do I say the right thing so they finally get it? That's a natural place to start when you've been hurt, confused, and worn down. But if you've been listening closely, you may notice that the question has quietly changed. It's no longer about how to make the narcissist feel anything. It's about how to live without them having any power over you at all. This is where the real victory lives. Not in fear, not in dominance, not in finally being seen as strong in their eyes. Because the truth is, trying to be feared is still a form of engagement. It still centers them, and narcissistic dynamics thrive on being centered, whether the attention is positive or negative. The moment you stop trying to evoke a reaction, any reaction, is the moment the dynamic loses oxygen. There's a deep irony here. People spend so much time wanting the narcissist to feel the pain they caused, to realize what they lost, to finally be shaken. But the moment you genuinely stop caring whether they feel any of that, you've already won. Not because they're defeated, but because you're free. Narcissists don't experience loss the way others do. They don't sit with regret and growth. They move on. They rewrite the story. They protect their self-image at all costs. So waiting for them to acknowledge your value or your pain keeps you tethered to an outcome that was never coming. Freedom begins when you stop needing that acknowledgement. This is also where people often feel conflicted. There can be a strange emptiness when the fight is over. You may have spent months or years emotionally bracing yourself, analyzing, anticipating, preparing. When you finally step out of that posture, there's a quiet space that opens up. And that space can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. But it's also where healing begins. You start to notice how much energy was being consumed by the relationship, the mental rehearsals, the emotional hangovers, the constant self-monitoring. As that fades, you're left with more room to think, to feel, to choose, and in that space, something remarkable happens. You reconnect with yourself. This is why the sentence we've been talking about isn't actually the point. It's a marker, a signal that the center of gravity has shifted from them to you. Whether you ever say it out loud or not, the real work has already been done when your behavior aligns with your values, not your fear. And here's something important to hear. You don't owe a narcissist a final performance. You don't owe them closure. You don't owe them a perfectly worded explanation. Closure is not a gift they give you, it's a boundary you give yourself. And once that boundary is in place, their reactions become irrelevant. This doesn't mean there won't be moments of doubt. Healing is not linear. You may still feel anger. You may still feel grief. You may even feel compassion. None of that negates your progress. What matters is that you're no longer organizing your life around managing their behavior. You're organizing it around protecting your peace. And that's where the fear they experience becomes almost incidental. Yes, narcissists are unsettled when they realize they no longer matter in the way they once did. Yes, they feel destabilized when their influence evaporates. But that's not your goal anymore. It's a byproduct, not the destination. The destination is a life where you don't scan messages for hidden meaning, where you don't brace for impact after every interaction, where your nervous system isn't constantly on high alert, where calm is not followed by chaos. That kind of peace is radical after narcissistic abuse, and it's earned. There's also a quiet dignity in no longer needing to explain yourself to someone who was committed to misunderstanding you, in no longer trying to prove your worth to someone who only valued your usefulness, in no longer shrinking or contorting to keep the peace. That dignity doesn't announce itself. It simply shows up in how you live. And when that happens, the narcissist fades into the background of your story, not as a villain you need to defeat, but as a chapter that's closed. They may never understand what happened. They may tell a different story. They may believe they won. None of that touches you anymore because you're no longer inside their narrative. That's the moment people often describe as feeling strangely light, not euphoric, just light, less burdened, less reactive, more present, and that presence is the clearest sign that you've reclaimed yourself. So if you came here looking for a sentence that would make a narcissist fear you forever, understand this: the sentence matters far less than the life you build once you stop needing to say it, because the greatest power you ever gain is the moment they no longer matter at all.